Height challenge. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity to be able to share my findings from my latest research that I've done as part of my senior thesis. And it is, as Lynn had mentioned, exploring the climate migration health nexus in the Sahel region. And I first wanted to start with a thank you to my research advisors, Professor Jessica Kritz, Dr. Elizabeth Ferris, and Dr. Maria Christina Schneider, who is here today, for all of your support and encouragement throughout this process. So big thank you to you. Now, starting with a little bit of background of the geographic focus of this particular study, why did I decide to pick the Sahel region? Now, the Sahel region is actually one of the poorest regions worldwide, located in West Africa, is demographically diverse with multiple different ethnic groups, as well as individuals at different socioeconomic status levels. With a total population of 109 million, about 30% currently are in need of dire humanitarian assistance, and about half engage in livestock rearing as a primary form of livelihood. And in connection to livestock rearing, we also see that the large majority of the population in the Sahel relies on rain-fed agriculture for their livelihoods. And what we see with the result of many factors, but mainly climate change, is that 65% of all arable land has actually become degraded over the years, which is causing a lot of problems in terms of sustenance. We also see that this Sahel region is a multi-causal crisis landscape defined by perpetual displacement, as shown by the Norwegian Refugee Council's world's most neglected displacement crises list that was published in 2021. 7 out of the 10 countries on the list are actually located in the Sahel, which just goes to show how neglected this particular region is with regards to this crisis. And why did I decide to pick agropastoralists as my particular population? Agropastoralists are people who leverage a combination of agriculture and livestock herding to sustain their livelihoods. Now, they're actually original climate adapters because this idea of voluntary migration on the basis of changing seasons has allowed them to thrive in ways that other populations have not, even in the midst of this regional climate intensity. However, with this increasing frequency and intensity of climate change, we're seeing this these voluntary forms of migration that have worked in the past face different struggles that are unique to some of the surrounding factors listed on the right-hand side of the screen. In addition to the climate crisis, we see population growth, urbanization, which I'm sure will be a big topic of discussion today, and political fragility playing major influencing roles. In terms of my research questions for my senior thesis, I wanted to focus on 2 aspects. One, what are the predominant drivers of changing mobility patterns among agropastoralist households in the Sahel region, and how are these factors influenced by surrounding populations and widespread environmental fluctuation? And I'm also focusing on 2 specific social dimensions, food security and conflict, which I'll be touching upon in just a moment. In terms of my research methods, I used 3 databases. 2 were ProQuest centric, so ProQuest Central, and then ProQuest Agriculture and Environmental Science Collection to get more of the specific agriculture and environmental aspects. And I also looked into Science Direct. In terms of inclusion criteria, I focused on 11 countries within the Sahel region. Internal displacement in particular, although there were instances of cross-border migration, my paper focused particularly on internally displaced people. There was also a dimensional focus of food security and conflict, and a population focus of course, agropastoralist households. And then as part of my literature review, I categorized my research into 3 main thematic codes: drivers of environmental migration, effects of these drivers on food security, and effects of these drivers on the exacerbation of intergroup conflict at the communal level. Now, we know conflict occurs at all different types of levels, but I wanted to focus on the community level, as you will see the reasons why in a little bit. And in total, I selected 24 articles that were included as part of the scoping review and secondary study. These are just some of the extracted elements from my thesis on how I arrived at those selected articles. In terms of the study type, just as a quick summary, 15 of them, of the 24, were mixed methods, and 9 were focused on the household level. And then in terms of geographic specificity, I looked at 7 specific case studies from Senegal, Cameroon, Sudan, Mali, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and Niger as specific case studies of how agropastoralists in those countries are adapting to this ever-changing landscape. Now, this is one of the most important slides of this presentation, really looking at the primary drivers that were determined as part of this research for environmental migration among this population. Number 1, land desertification. So 15 of the 24 articles focused on how land degradation and diminishing land availability has impacted agropastoralist use of pastures, as well as at the bottom, so the top are the primary drivers, and then the bottom are the secondary drivers. We see that population growth, in particular urbanization and modernization initiatives, playing a huge transformative role when it comes to this diminishing land availability. For number 2, drought, pretty self-explanatory. These warming temperatures are depleting soils and is making risk reduction through transhumance as this climate adaptation mechanism that much harder. Number 3, food insecurity, which I'll be touching upon very soon, is leading to poor nutritional outcomes. And this is directly correlated with water scarcity as well for both humans and livestock, which is very, very important for this particular population. Number 4, we see host communities, specifically lifestyle differences, fear of violence, and external pressures from sedentary farmers in association with land tenure and violation of land rights being a major deterrent for agropastoralists. And then lastly, we see climate variability as this overarching driver with these unpredictable rainfall seasons leading to forage scarcity and livestock loss on which these agropastoralists depend heavily for their livelihood, which is creating a whole slew of other problems. And looking specifically at the effects of migratory drivers on food security, I'm not going to dive too deep into all of these, but I do want to highlight the very first one, conflict escalation, which 9 of the 24 articles touched upon. And I'm going to explain why conflict is important in a little bit, but just to kind of give a summary of some of the effects, we see poverty being a major effect as a result of food security, disease exposure, land degradation, and climate variability, among others. And then we look at exacerbation of migratory drivers on intergroup conflict exacerbation at the communal level. And the reason this was actually part of my secondary study is because, as we had seen in the previous slide, conflict escalation actually was determined to be the number 1 effect of migration on food security. And so I was interested to see, well, how does conflict have anything to do with food security? And so that is what led to this idea of the secondary study, looking specifically at how farmer-herder conflicts, looking specifically at the ethnic tensions between these two groups, have led to competition over these scarce natural resources that have grown even more scarce over the years as a result of climate variability. We also see, of course, urbanization, especially these politics around land rights and the favoritism by governments and pretty much any type of sedentary community being prioritized over the needs of agropastoralists, which is leading to a whole social justice lens within this primarily climate-driven situation. And then we see some of the key findings. Food insecurity and intergroup conflict were actually found to be bidirectional causal variables of displacement. Now, what this means is that essentially food insecurity and intergroup conflict cause displacement, and displacement causes the other two as well. So it's becoming a big cycle of not being able to have one action address just food insecurity, just displacement, or just conflict. You have to look at all 3 of them together to see where are the elements that we can address at the root causes, before looking at the kind of top layers that have been described as the effects from the earlier slides. And then in terms of some of the main observations as part of this research, intergroup communal conflict was concurrently referenced alongside food insecurity, as I had mentioned, particularly within the context of resource competition and social marginalization, which comes from that preferential aid to sedentary communities. I'm getting ahead of myself there. And then we see climate change is also being disproportionately breaking down nomadic livelihoods, and that is leading to increased ethnic tensions. And if we look in the previous slide, sedentarization as a peacemaking tool, what we're seeing currently is that a lot of agropastoralists are being forced to comply with the needs and desires of sedentary communities as a way to adapt their voluntary migration patterns into what is becoming forced for them in order to survive. And so they're not able to have a voice or determination over what they want their livelihoods to look like. And in order to maintain peace with their surrounding communities, they're forced to sedentarize, which is not part of their tradition, their community, their culture, and it's really, really breaking down their livelihoods and causing physical, emotional, and cultural damage. Now, looking ahead, just wanted to provide a little context of where this study I would anticipate would go beyond this, acknowledging how these food security and conflict serve as bidirectional causal variables, recognizing how climate change serves as both a trigger and amplifier of conflict and that corresponding vulnerability, and some more comprehensive understanding of the interplay between changing migration flows, climate variability, and occurrences of conflict on the basis of resource scarcity. And my current research is focused on how we can leverage One Health approaches, which are looking at humans, environment, and animal health to see how we can address meningococcal meningitis among vulnerable populations like agropastoralists in the Sahel region. So I'm a global health major, so this was something that I'm really passionate about in figuring out how we can address these health impacts on these vulnerable populations. And it's interesting because agropastoralists, over 50 million of them are completely left out of the health system within the Sahel. And so there is virtually no data available with respect to this population. And so I'm interested to see what interventions exist currently and what we can do to support them going forward. And this was one of my favorite lines from my thesis that I thought really framed the paper really well. So concrete understanding of the contextual backdrop of recurrent humanitarian crises cannot be realized without taking into account the fragmented political landscape, deep-rooted social injustices, and long-established ethnic tensions that have characterized the Sahel. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
So we're going to entertain the faculty questions after both presentations. And Edidiong, you're next. We're going to stick with the theme of migration and its impact, but now we're looking at economic impacts of African diaspora in the U.S.
All right. Good afternoon. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. So my name is Edidiong Chris Obot. I'm a National Urban Fellow and also a Global City Scholar, and I'm happy to be here. So this is actually going to be my capstone, and so it's ongoing, and I'm at the very more so kind of like middle stages of it. So I'm just going to present what I have so far. So y'all bear with me. All right. So the African diaspora, why am I interested in it? Because I am from the African diaspora. You guessed it. My family is actually Nigerian. My parents are Nigerian. They immigrated here 40 years ago or so. And I'm one of the, amongst a group of the first generation born Nigerians in America. And so why is this most important to me is because I'm looking at my generational group and I'm looking at how we can do more, not only in our communities where we live, whether that's in the cities in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth. I'm from Texas, so that's why I'm calling out Texas City, so bear with me. Or if you're in another country as well, I have cousins who have schooled in Italy and Australia and the rest nine, and so they live there. And so my vision for this was how can we have an economic impact where we're living and also contribute back home. So the African diaspora, so my research showed that the countries with the most significant African immigrant populations are the US, France, UK, Italy, and Spain. So I'm going to focus and zero more in on the US African diaspora. The country with the largest African diaspora population is the US, with 4.5 million African immigrants as of 2020, according to the Migration Policy Institute. And so the idea here in the framework is to kind of highlight exactly the demographic of the folks I'm going to focus in on. So moving on to the state with the largest African diaspora population. So many of y'all may have guessed it, but Maryland has a lot more African immigrants. Then second is Texas, moving forward to California, Minnesota, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and Georgia. And there are more, but I just wanted to highlight some of these states because a lot of them are more popular. People recognize it, they know friends, their family, and they live there. And so this is according to the most recent census information. So which African nation is the largest source of African immigrants? You can shout it out. Oh, okay. Yes, hence my green, white, green. As you can see, yes, I am Nigerian. And so I was actually I wasn't as surprised, but I do know that we have a very huge like Nigerian population in the US. I mean, you probably have met, seen, live, work, play, college with someone that is Nigerian. So according to the Migration Policy Institute, in 2015, Nigerians were the largest source of African immigrants in the US, and that number has increased. And so with that, this is an estimate of 213K of first generation Nigerian immigrants. So that is talking about my parents. We're not even talking about folks who are actually born here. That number is much significantly more. And then for those who are second generation, now this information is from 2015, so that number has increased. It's 163K in 2015 of folks that they would call second generation born. US with at least one Nigerian born parent. In 2022 census, the estimated population of 390,000 Nigerian born individuals residing in the US are making Nigerians again the largest African immigrant population. And the honorable mentions are Kenya and Ethiopia. All right. Okay. So let's zero in on, I wanted to give y'all some demographics and kind of show y'all who we're focusing on. And now we're going to move into the economic impact. So the economic impact of Black immigrants in the US, and this is a collective whole of Caribbeans, Sub-Saharan Africans, all the things in between. And so in 2021, the Black immigrant household generated a total income of $153 billion. And that's in the United States. And after paying taxes, 39 billion of that was paid to taxes, and afterwards $114 billion was left in spending power. And so for these immigrants, they're spending it in American businesses, investing in housing, some form of real estate, supporting their own communities. And we're talking about local in the United States. So $114 billion is being poured back into these communities on a yearly basis. And I want to focus more on remittances. So the reason why I'm focusing on this, because I'm using my own life story, my parents' life story of, making the call back home, whether that's a calling card back then. Now we have WhatsApp, thank the Lord. But the idea here is that we send money back home for various things, right? It might be for food, it might be for housing needs, whatever the needs are, right? And so I wanted to see at least like how much of the money that we're sending back home is actually possibly impacting the economic system back home for them. And also here, what does that look like? So money sent by immigrants to their home countries in the sub-Saharan Africa reached about $41 billion, and that was in 2017. So this graph is basically just showing the economic impact of Black immigrants in the US. So these two charts, and I think you can kind of see them, but this is actually from the Pew Research Center. And this is information from 2017 in regards to remittances, and specifically Nigerians, because we said that they're the largest source of African immigrants. And so in Nigeria in 2021, it was received by far the most remittances in 2020 with $17.2 billion. And these transfers accounted for 4% of its GDP. And Nigeria itself has received the most remittances in any other country in the region since 2009, with $18 billion from immigrants. So the reason I'm zeroing in on that is just because we send money home frequently. But when we look at some of the African countries, a lot of them are in the low income area. And so the idea here is to understand when you're sending money from a high income country, what could that impact look like for a low income country in Africa? So I wanted to focus in and say, okay, well, how much money are we even sending back home? And this is quite a lot. But then you go back home and you're looking and seeing like the infrastructure for certain things are not built up all the way. So that was the idea behind showing this slide. So moving on, I'm still in the middle of the research. So some future studies and things that I'm considering, questions I'm considering, is how much does the immigration integration impact African immigrants themselves, especially in the United States? How does, like, what is the correlation of the economic impact and immigration integration in the US Africa diaspora? And then also identifying some case studies. So the Global Cities Scholars Program will be taking a trip to Philadelphia. So I plan on looking at one of those as my case study, because they have a kind of like a model called the African Town, African Village of businesses who come together and just basically sell their goods. And then the last piece is looking at identifying more so international policy management solutions for this kind of economic impact. So thank you.
So faculty, please use the microphone because we're recording. Student, please come forward. I have a very, very general question for both of you with respect to population trends. And so could you shared a lot of directional information about trends in the Sahel. Can you share with us what are the kind of macro population trends? And then likewise, I think in the United States, very interesting, right? Where are these immigrants living? Simple question.
No, thank you so much for that question. Looking specifically at agropastoralists, a lot of their traditional migratory patterns have yet to be mapped out. But what it is based on is seasonal rainfall. So if my memory is correct, they go from usually the northern areas to the south during the summer months, and then from the bottom up during the more colder months, or the rainy seasons, I guess, just because that's where they see the greatest pasture availability, the ability to grow greater yields, and then what we're seeing right now is those patterns being disrupted as a result of the sedentary communities taking up what is already very scarce land. And so agropastoralists are forced to then travel 100 extra miles, 200 extra miles just to find a new area, to whether that be in the north or the south, to be able to have these pastures and help their livestock grow as well. And so we're seeing that shift in time as a big thing, as well as location, as a result of these interactions with surrounding communities. You answered your question.
Okay, so where are the African immigrants going towards, or where are they moving to, specifically Nigerians? About the last census cycle, a majority of Nigerians were in the Maryland, DMV area, New York, Atlanta, and in California. So like the Bay Area and LA. But as of recent, based on the current 2022 census, actually Houston, Texas has become what they call the baby Lagos of Nigeria. Lagos is not the capital, but it's a very high booming place. And so you see a lot of Nigerian immigrants who come there. Why? One, there's more community there that's like them. Two, the weather is basically similar to Nigeria. Three, there's like a sense of that community, right? That form of placement there. So when they come to that city, they're able to see themselves there. They see their culture there. They see their people there. So hope that kind of answers your question.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to be here for these amazing presentations. I'm Carla Shedd. I'm an associate professor of sociology here at the college, and I study race, place, and inequality, specifically looking at young people's experiences in cities. So we actually just had a speaker in the social department on Wednesday who talked about food justice and how people mobilized around food insecurity in the 60s in my home state of Mississippi. And it really connects to this particular set of presentations. And I wanted to kind of bring some of that in and talking about how people come together around food. And the question for Edidiong is to ask you about how that culture manifests in perhaps driving people to certain cities. You mentioned climate, but how do people come together around food? And I think food is perhaps, you know, from your presentation, Shreyaa, it is an instance of conflict. And so having these ways where food connects, but food also drives conflict. Could you speak to that in both of your works?
Sure. So food, if you all know, in the Nigerian culture is how we all come together and break bread. Food is used for various traditional things as much as any other immigrant kind of community. Specifically, I'll just speak for Houston, just because I'm from there and I have very personal experiences. This past summer, actually, they hosted the first Chop and Block Festival. So this festival is in honor of West African culture. And basically the restaurant Chop and Block had various culinary chefs from different parts of West Africa that came in and shared their dish with the community overall. One of the things that I see in terms of people coming to Houston specifically is they want Nigerian food. Where can I go get some? Am I going to finger licking? Am I going to Chop and Block? Am I going to? And one thing about Houston is very diverse with its food itself. So you see a lot of people who come visit just for the food itself. And so I think that that's one of the things that's very unique to that city overall. But you also see it also out here in the DMV area where you have a very huge Ethiopian population. You can kind of go to Little Ethiopia and LA as well. And so you start seeing when you go to some of these cities, more of like the placement aspect of seeing, oh, when you go to this part of a major city or even a small city, I could get some food there and be a part of their culture.
Yeah, and taking it outside the United States, looking at the Sahel region, as I'd mentioned in my presentation, sedentarization has been used as this peacemaking tool. And one of the ways that agropastoralists have yet again adapted in order to leverage the strengths of both the sedentary farmers and the agropastoralists is on the basis of food. Really figuring out how to take their strengths of livestock rearing and combine that with sedentary farmers' agricultural outputs and figuring out ways to strengthen the yields of both. And that has actually led to a lot of solutions arising from the community level for these conflicts or resource scarcity, because both communities are able to support each other on the basis of food. And so we really do see, despite the fact that food is primarily a driver of conflict, it is also being experimented and, you know, looked into as this connector of communities. And so, yeah.
If I can add one more thing, with the food aspect too, a lot of times some of the leaves and the ingredients are not actually here in the US. So you see a lot of them, they would import it or bring it back from home and then grow it in their backyards and then take it to the farmer's market and sell it in the African food market stores as well. So that's kind of like another way to kind of bring home back in your backyard kind of thing.
Thank you for that. I guess my other question is around mobility. So both of you are talking about movement, but I wanted to think about it in this sociological way of social mobility. And could you talk about the selection of those who perhaps become agro-pastoralists and move around versus those who are sedentary? And then can you speak to the social mobility of those who immigrate from Nigeria in particular to Maryland and Houston and everywhere else? So could you talk about the kind of class stratification that exists?
It's a really great question. And that was something I wasn't able to touch upon in the 10 minutes for this, but I did touch upon it in my thesis. And it's actually interesting because agropastoralists are usually, you think, rural and urban. And we think urban being the more privileged and the more have more access to resources, and then rural, the latter, the opposite. But then there's a layer underneath it with the agropastoralists. And one of the main reasons as to why they're completely neglected from a lot of the systems, whether it be the health system, the food system, practically every part of society that we traditionally see as society, is because they're always moving. They're never staying in one place. No one really knows what their movements are. The patterns are very constricted within their own communities and associated nomadic communities. There's not much discourse that goes on between agropastoralists, pastoralists, and sedentary communities. And so we see that create even larger gaps between particularly the governments and the sedentary farmers. And so naturally, the government is going to, when you see an open piece of land, they're going to prioritize these sedentary communities that they have a pre-existing relationship with socially, culturally, physically, rather than those who are agropastoralists who they view with suspicion, view with uncertainty, with doubt. And we see those play a big role in terms of who gets priority access to the land, who gets priority treatment when it comes to diseases, et cetera, et cetera. And so I found that really a really interesting point as well.
Thank you. So I'll say this is a part of my background research on the initial points of immigration, especially for Africans when the doors were finally open in the 1970s or so. And so part of that, you saw a lot of specifically Nigerian immigrants who came for various reasons. They came for schooling for the most part, and you saw that come. And they were doing, different degrees. A lot of them engineering. Some of y'all may hear that, you think about Nigerian, they're a doctor, lawyer, engineer, and that's exactly what they were going to school for, because the idea and the intent was to learn that information and take it back home. But obviously life be life, and so not a lot of them went back home, to be honest. But as you get older and you see the kind of trends, a lot of them kind of either they migrated from like a Minnesota or Missouri to like a Texas and Georgia and DMV and California, just because of the economic upward mobility they had because of their degrees. And they started settling there for the most part. And then their children themselves, that's what they know. They know the major cities that they're on. So as they're my age and they're getting older and they're having kids, they tend to settle in that same area unless you're not married really, or if you are one of those couples that likes to travel because you have the economic means to do so. But Nigerians overall, when it comes to immigration, integration, assimilating, not necessarily so, but as far as the economic mobility, they have that because they're like one of the highest, they have one of the highest amount of degrees in the United States, and they're highly educated. So that affords them the ability to move however they want to move, and also have the finances to do that as well.
Hi, I'm Robin King. I teach in SFS in International Business Diplomacy and Latin American Studies. And so I'm not used to working on Africa, right? But I am sort of the issues that you're talking about are very similar in terms of what we see in Latin America. And a lot of the research there focuses on the immigrant side, on the sort of the remittances and the effect they have on cities in those places, right? Or movement sort of from, for whatever reason, to different places. And I wondered if that's something that comes up at all in terms of what you're looking at, or if that's something that's of interest that you set aside because everything is too big and you have to get finished, or sort of just your thoughts on that. And if you have seen that kind of research, because that's really interesting in terms of the kinds of distortions it introduces, new ideas, moving back and forth, and just sort of all kinds of interesting stuff.
Well, thank you for the question. And yes, I am interested in that. Again, I don't have a whole lot of time, so I will try to touch a little bit on it, but that's one of the questions that I raise as future research, is looking at how that impact of remittances locally where that person is, right? So that might be in Houston or Dallas or wherever, and also is impacting that country back home or that city back home that they're sending money to. So that is of interest. And I remember you from the Global Social Innovation Lab. Okay.
And this wasn't a subject of my particular research. However, before I arrived at this topic, I was actually looking at how economic migration has opened up opportunities for people in the Sahel, not necessarily agropastoralists, but seeing that rural to urban migration was actually my preliminary area of interest. It just turned out to be too broad. So I had to find a population and geographic focus. However, when I was looking at kind of the surface level research, I saw that a lot of the times we see families not necessarily migrating together. We see probably the breadwinner, the young man, usually of the house, traveling to a new area, usually the city, and work in these pretty harsh conditions in order to send remittances back to their families. And so we see challenges on both sides. Of course, the young men having to deal with these harsh working conditions and human rights violations and all of that. And of course, leaving their family behind. And then the women had to take care of their children, had to continue the livelihoods in their own home cities. And they face a lot of social stigma without having the man in the house in a lot of patriarchal societies. And so we saw challenges on both sides. And so I think remittances play a really, really unique role in that it's difficult to get, and we don't necessarily see the impact being fully utilized within this region because sometimes the husband would have to come back and they're injured, then those remittances would have to go towards supporting, the health and well-being of him. And so it's really interesting to see how money flows work with respect to economic migration. Thanks for your question.